This is me, but not me right now. This is me from 2019, in my college dorm room. It was my first year of college, and I had an HP Envy which had pretty decent specs for the time. It had an 8th generation quad-core processor and 16 gigabytes of RAM. But there was one main problem with it. Well, actually two, but I'll get to the second one later. This HP Envy was quite unreliable. It would sometimes have a display which would not turn back on after waking up from sleep mode, and it would only come back after a hard reset with the power button. It was also extremely slow to boot, and would need more time after booting to actually be used. I needed a computer that would just work. It didn't need to be high performance, or modern, it just needed to work. So I went to eBay and ordered the cheapest working laptop I could find, which ended up being this ThinkPad T400, which I had purchased for $44. To my surprise, not only was this computer more reliable than the HP, but it also seemed faster. My HP had a mechanical hard drive in it, which I didn't know at the time was the reason why it was so slow. However, the ThinkPad also had a mechanical hard drive in it as well, and it had much weaker specs, with a Core 2 Duo and 4 gigabytes of RAM. I believe the reason the T400 seemed much faster was because it was running Windows 7, which was a much lighter and faster operating system. At the time, I had no idea why this computer seemed so much faster, and it seemed like complete magic that such an old computer would be so much more usable than my newer computer. Shortly after I got it, I did what every college student does with their laptop. I immediately sticker bombed it. Originally, I had planned for this laptop to be my secondary laptop, but quickly it became my main laptop. I would use it for all my classwork, some light video editing. I even used it to teach a coding class during the summer when my colleague's MacBook failed. While everyone else had sleek modern laptops, I had this old-looking black brick. And while it wasn't the best performance, it always worked, and it was always something that I could count on. For a year, I used this laptop without any hardware upgrades, just cringy stickers. For my next year of college, I would continue to use the T400 as my main computer. But that was the year that Windows 7 support was soon ending by January 2020. I decided that before then, I would change the operating system over to Linux, which ended up being Ubuntu 18.04. At that time, it was still using the same hardware, but after a few months, I decided that I would upgrade some of the hardware, since Ubuntu told me that it detected that my hard drive was overheating. I upgraded it to a 500GB Crucial SSD, and I upgraded it to 8GB of RAM. I now know that I'm supposed to turn off the computer when I change the RAM. I also had done something else. Something that I'm not proud of. When I installed the RAM, I cut the palm rest so that the computer would have a beat up look. Because for some reason I thought that looked cool, and I also made Ubuntu look like Mac OS. A month later, I had ordered an X9100 Core 2 Extreme with 3.06 gigahertz of pure dual-core raging fury. I installed that processor and immediately attempted to run Windows 10 in a VirtualBox on Linux. That's when I learned that whenever you replace the CPU, you should also replace the old thermal paste as well. At that moment, it was feeling very hot, and it had shut itself off from overheating. I tried turning it back on, but it did nothing. At that moment, I thought it was done. I thought I had fried it and it was all my fault. Several hours later, I tried turning it back on, and to my surprise, it worked. To prevent further damage, I turned it off and ordered some thermal paste, this time doing some research on how to properly replace the CPU. I took it apart and I redid the thermal paste. Let's see if it works.
The Bluetooth device is connected successfully.
Alright, I think that means it works. I would continue to use this computer as my main computer, but I would need to occasionally go back to my HP when I needed something that would only work on Windows. It wasn't long before the HP broke itself in half, with plastic inserts popping out. When I took it to the repair technician, before I could say anything, he said, "So your hinge is broken." Not a question, a statement. He took a look at it, and he said that this was a very common issue. He said that it would cost $300 to fix, and said that even when it is fixed, it'll probably still break again. Later, there was a class action lawsuit about this computer, and apparently, I was pretty lucky that the computer even held together as long as it did. Many people who had the same model of laptop had it break after just a few months. I ended up selling the laptop as for parts and moved on. After that, I bought a ThinkPad X1 Carbon Gen 8. It was a good computer, although it didn't have the same charm as the older ThinkPad. I soon started to experiment with several other models of ThinkPads, to the point of it becoming an obsession. I soon figured out buying ThinkPads from a recycler without an operating system installed was the best way to get a great deal. And over time, my collection grew. Pretty soon, my T400 and X1 Carbon mostly just sat in the background, as I would cherish other models of ThinkPads that had the classic robust ThinkPad design, with better performance than the Core 2 Extreme. Several years later go by, and the T400 is nothing more than a nostalgia piece that I hold on to. This laptop has endured so much abuse from me, and taught me a lot about upgrading and working on computers. I decided it was time that I brought this device back to looking clean again. I found a ThinkPad T61 for sale in Canada. What was interesting about this one was that it had the IBM logo, and most T61s did not have IBM logos. This laptop was being sold as is for parts, and had a failing backlight in the screen. The T61 motherboard was working just fine, and fortunately I found someone who wanted that motherboard to fix a T60 that had a failed motherboard, so I'm glad it didn't go to waste. To get the T400 chassis to fit in the T61, I needed to make some changes that would allow it to fit. The palm rest had a screw insert that was too long to fit and needed to be removed so that it would fit. The bottom cover had this metal tab that was not on the T400. At first, I tried making the hole bigger with a screwdriver, but instead I ended up removing a small bit of it by breaking off this section. It also had these two other screw inserts near the battery area, and they were getting in the way, so I ended up removing them as well. For the screen, I moved the T400 screen and screen connectors over to the T61 bezel, and I needed the T61 hinge attachments on the T400 screen, as well as I needed to use the T61 cable guide as well. After a few days of finagling, I had finally put it together. This laptop is now looking quite nice, and with the AMD Radeon RV620, it can do some light graphical tasks as well, such as video editing and gaming. This laptop is quite special to me, and led me on a path to being a ThinkPad enthusiast. I often wonder what my life would have been like if it wasn't for this ThinkPad. I also wonder what would have happened if I had gotten some random old Toshiba instead of the ThinkPad. Maybe I would have been a Toshiba enthusiast. Or if I had just picked out a decent Dell Latitude with an SSD as my college laptop instead of an HP, then I probably would have never been a ThinkPad enthusiast. I probably would have never used Linux. It's crazy to think about how my life could have been very different if I had just made some small different decisions years ago. Have you ever looked back and realized that a small decision you made years ago snowballed into a massive change that put you where you are today? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you liked the video, consider subscribing. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a good day.